Our next speaker, Unmesh Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, comrades, brothers, sisters. I'm glad, really proud to be here, in fact, and I'll speak for a few minutes about our visit to Turkey in December and the work we've done since then and what we can do. I'm a member of the GLA, the Greater London Authority. I represent City and East London, which is the City of London, Hamlets, Newham, Barking and Dagenham. Firstly, can I say that what is happening today in Turkey is actually nothing short of living in being in a police state. You read about all these things. You read about Chile 1974, when I was a young student growing up. I read books, Chile, the guerrillas amongst us and all that. And of course, I won't say it's a fascist state, but it's the nearest thing that I've seen to a police state going to Turkey. The last time I'd been in Turkey was in 1991 when I went on a short break to Istanbul. And Tosh talked about not, quite rightly, about not going to Turkey on a holiday. I don't think I'll be allowed back anymore after my experiences there. We went there to offer solidarity and observe the trial of the co-leaders of the HDP. That is, we were allowed to, because we weren't allowed to. The trials were transferred. This was the initial stages of the trial. And Morris was with us, Lord Glassman Morris was with us. Jeanette, my friend, was with us as well, Ibrahim. And the trials were taken to military court, Sirkhan prison, which is about 50 odd miles outside Ankara. Now, if it was difficult for us to get there, this is the middle of nowhere, then can you imagine what it is like for the relatives of prisoners and so on. And also the stories we heard, people coming to observe trials of their families and so on, their buses being stopped outside Ankara, not being allowed to come in, not being allowed to go anywhere near court. Initially we thought we would be let in. The judge said we could be let in. In the afternoon, the judge, under pressure from the authorities, changed his mind and said that we were a threat to the security of the court and of the country. Amongst our ranks, and I'm not elitist, titles don't mean anything to me. I went there as a representative of the labor movement. I'm also a member of the GMB, and I represent the GMB today at this meeting. But we had MEPs from all parties. We had Lords, Lord Glassman, or Morris as we call him. We had GLA members, my colleague. We had MPs, Sinn Féin MP, and so on. And as the day wore on, we were surrounded by police with riot shields, banging their trenches against the riot shields. Now, I've actually been to Northern Ireland. I went to Northern Ireland in the late 70s and early 80s, so I've seen some of the so-called troubles. But Paul Nask actually grew up in West Belfast, and that reminded him and me of what happened in Ireland at the height of the troubles, the banging of the shields, which was pure intimidation. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we couldn't get in. So the next day, we knew we wouldn't be allowed back, but we went there just to show solidarity. Anytime we tried to take any pictures, immediately people would, the police officer would come up to you, stop you taking pictures of whatever. I just had a simple GMB banner with my colleague, my comrade Dennis McNulty, and immediately the police officer came up to us and said that was, committing some offense. Well, he spoke in Turkish, but we knew what he was on about, and we knew he meant business, put the banner down or else. So I could go on and on, but it wasn't about me or about us, because we were coming back to London. It was about the families out there and what they have to get up through. So the courtroom was packed with supporters of the ruling party who were just being let in, and yet people who had relatives, facing all these charges, they weren't being allowed in. We went and saw what is the Turkish equivalent of the GMB and Unison, the tax on the public sector workers, the so-called coup against Erdogan. And I said this to the British Deputy High Commissioner, who was rather uncomfortable when we met her, that the Turkish army actually wants to do a coup. They actually don't need any lessons. They know how to do coups. The coup was used as an excuse to clamp down on civil liberties, on democratic movements, on the women's movements, on groups like the HDP, and so on. And the public, thousands of workers have lost their jobs. They don't get benefits as a result. So our trade union colleagues are under enormous pressure, to say the least. We spoke to the British Deputy High Commissioner about sanctions. She sort of rebuffed the idea, said the government was putting pressure on Erdogan. Well, what sort of pressure? With what results? So I was quite disappointed by her attitude. We met with the lawyers for the families. The hospitality of our comrades in the HTP, who are under enormous state pressure, something that we can't even begin to imagine how they bear up to it. These are people actually looking at dozens of years in prison. It was only the last night that I found that the person who was interpreting for us, he himself was facing charges. Virtually every second person we met from the HTP was facing some sort of charges. His crime, he basically acts as the HTP's, not envoy, but liaison with EU states. That was regarded as some sort of offense. His job is translation. We met parliamentarians whose passports have been taken away, so they can't travel around the EU and so on. So it was more than an eye-opener. It certainly strengthened my determination to come back here and do everything I can to fight for justice for our comrades, brothers and sisters in the HDP, our colleagues in Turkey, the democratic movement, the trade union movement. We met people who had a hunger strike. I mean, as I say, I could go on and on. But what is happening today to Kurdish people is one of the 20th century's sort of historical injustice. Kurdistan is a state. It is people living all around Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and so on. And Erdogan is nothing short of fascistic to actually crush the Kurds. I mean, his speeches, that resembles what Hitler said, that the Kurds outbreed us. We must raise more children. The role of women is to be at home, not to be out, in modern society working. And the West has really got to wake up to what is going on and stop appeasing Erdogan. That is a short reality, really, that we cannot appease people like Erdogan. So what we can do in this country is to use our strength in the Labour Party, in the trade unions, in local authorities, where we have power, where we have influence. So both Janet and myself, and Janet will speak in due course, but certainly we'll do what we can from the GLA. We did host a meeting after a visit from Turkey. I know that my union is GMB, and I welcome what Tosher but Aslev, but the unions have got to come back together. Yes, of course, we know that there are other countries where our comrades, trade unions have been killed, Colombia and so on. My own personal views that each union should try to adopt, if I may use that word, particular country so that we can actually disperse our resources. But Turkey is in Europe. Well, I mean, there are arguments whether it should be the EU or not, but it's just 2.5 hours away. And what is going on there, as I say, is nothing short of a police state. So we owe it to those brave brothers and sisters of ours to do what we can here to build a genuine solidarity movement. And that's why I welcome Justice for Kurdistan, and we will do what we can within the local authority world. We've got Tom from Brent, and that's Janet, who's my GLA colleague. So I welcome this endeavor. I'll show you everything I can to assist it. And we cannot forget what our people in Turkey are going through.
Thank you. Many thanks.